Now, evolution would try to argue that presented initially by some accident, we had the development of the slime mold, and the slime mold successively evolved into something like a human being. In order to substantiate such a claim, you have to be able to make a transition from one kind to another kind. You have to be able to go from a chimpanzee to a human being. You have to be able to go from a lizard to a chimpanzee. And to justify such a claim, you have to have evidence. Well, one of the self-evident things is we know, for example, that the chimpanzee and all of the primate brains are 400 cc's. And we know the human brain is 1,200 cc's. So if you want to make the claim that you are proceeding from an ape to a human being, and that it is coming about by systematic perfection, which violates all the laws of physics, you have to be able to show some evidence that an ape is transforming from a 400 cc brain to a 1,200 cc brain. And the evidence is non-existent. There's no evidence of these transformations going from one kind to another, and all the evidence is completely consistent with each after its own kind.
Virtually all of the proposed missing links between apes and humans have been soundly discredited, from the outright fabrications to those that were the object of wishful thinking. In almost all cases, fossil fragments are discovered and heralded as missing links, with the artist's conception presented in the press, museums, textbooks, and journal articles with great artistic license taken. For example, in 1922, Harold Cook found one tooth in Nebraska and declared it to be a missing link, dubbed Nebraska Man. The Illustrated London News published the artist's conception of an entire ape-like man and his wife just from the tooth. It was subsequently discovered to be the tooth of an extinct pig. In 1856, fossils found in the Neander Valley near Dusseldorf, Germany, were presented as a 30,000-year-old ancestor of modern humans. In 1909, a relatively complete skeleton of a Neanderthal was found in La Chapelle-Ancey, France. Artist conceptions were published that showed Neanderthal man as a very ape-like creature. Since that time, it has been found that culturally, the Neanderthals were exactly the same as modern humans, burying their dead with flowers, painting, making and using musical instruments, using language, poetry, etc. Moreover, the brain capacity of their skull vault was found to be on average 1,600 cubic centimeters, which is 200 cubic centimeters larger than most human brain capacities. A longtime science writer, Boyce Rosenberger, explains it this way in Science Digest in 1981.
Unfortunately, the vast majority of artists' conceptions are based more on imagination than on evidence. But a handful of expert natural history artists begin with the fossil bones of a hominid and work from there. Much of the reconstruction, however, is guesswork. Bones say nothing about the fleshy parts of the nose, lips, or ears. Artists must create something between an ape and a human being. The older the specimen is said to be, the more ape-like they make it. Hairiness is a matter of pure conjecture. The guesswork approach often leads to errors.
One of the major arguments used in defense of the evolutionary timeline is carbon-14 dating. However, Dr. Demadian points out the inaccuracies of this method.
The radioactive dating is reliable for short periods of time, 500 years, 1,000 years, maybe 2,000 years. But when you try to use that radioactive dating of radioactive isotope as it's producing this decay, and arguing that that's going to give you a reliable estimation going back 100 million years or 500 million years, it's completely unwarranted. When I take a sample that's got carbon-14 in it, in order to be able to trust that radioactive dating, I have to isolate that sample and certify that nothing's coming into the sample or nothing's coming out of the sample that can remove that radioactive tracer and create the impression that it's much older than it is. Nobody's provided evidence like that. If I have a sample that's going to be washed by water, I'm going to wash carbon-14 out of there. That's not complicated. And nobody's provided substantive evidence that they have a sample with carbon-14 dating that remained completely uninfluenced and isolated for 500,000 years. The radioactive dating is just not a reliable argument for millions of years creation. It just isn't. When I was lost in the grip of what I call the bondage of secular materialism and secular atheism. And I said at one time to a tech that I had that there is no God. And my tech turned around and said to me, I can't believe you just said that. And I said, well, that's what I believe. And then, subsequent to that, learned that I was dead wrong and accepted Christ and salvation passionately thereafter. But it took a lot of understanding. See, the problem is that when you're a scientist and you've undergone the kind of extensive education that you're undergoing, in the process, without you even knowing, you are being programmed into the sacredness of materialism and evolution. What's really happening is you're being put in chains and don't know what's happening. And the only way you escape those chains is to examine what is the evidence for this accidental process of evolution. And when you look at it in detail, you discover that there is no evidence. It's science fiction from start to finish. I think that the important thing to understand is that when Darwin was setting about to do what Darwin was doing, he was getting encouragement from Nietzsche, the God is dead Nietzsche, and he was getting encouragement from Wellhausen. And they both were taking philosophical positions that there was no God, and that materialism was the rule. It's the same, by the way, materialism and the evolutionary survival of the fittest that gave us Adolf Hitler and all the evil and wickedness therein. So we're being continually programmed into this philosophy, this false philosophy, what I call the science fiction of evolution. But when you look at it very carefully about what did Darwin do and what did Darwin not do, what you see very clearly is what Darwin showed as within the bird species, there were variations from one bird type to another type. But Darwin showed us no way to get from one kind to another kind, which is what Genesis teaches us. Genesis teaches us each after its own kind. It doesn't say anything about variation within the kind. It simply says you can't go from one kind to another kind without the Creator. And Darwin never got past that. Darwin was exclusively committing to variation within the kind. And he provides no explanation from getting from nothing to something, or no explanation to get from a slime mold to a human being, which, I like to say this, but it's just plain preposterous.